Behind the mythological image of Loki lies a far darker psychological abyss. What happens when someone grows up in the shadow of perfect siblings? What if silent rejection is more destructive than any battle? This isn't just the story of a villain. It's a deep dive into the quiet collapse of a mind trapped by endless comparison. Brace yourself, after this, you'll never see Loki, or envy, the same way again. Loki's story did not begin with a dramatic act of rebellion or a moment of clarity that set him apart. Instead, it began in silence, amidst the towering grandeur of Asgard, a kingdom where strength and honor were the currency of worth. His older brother Thor, the embodiment of power, wielded his hammer with ease and commanded the admiration of all. The gods looked to him as the shining example of heroism, the perfect son of Odin. Loki, however, was never destined to fit that mold. From an early age, he felt the sharp sting of being different not only in ability but in essence. He was the shadow lurking in the bright light of his brother's accomplishments. Growing up, Loki was surrounded by the echoes of praise reserved for others. The halls of the palace rang with celebrations of bravery, strength, and valor, qualities he struggled to claim as his own. His talents lay elsewhere, a keen mind, a quick wit, an instinct for subtlety and cunning. But these qualities were rarely celebrated in a world that valued brute force and visible heroics. The constant comparison to Thor and others created a psychological pressure that shaped Loki's identity from the very beginning. Psychologists refer to this as a compensatory mechanism. When direct competition in one area is impossible, the individual redirects their energy to develop other skills. Yet, while this adaptation brought him cleverness and agility, it did little to soothe the deeper wounds of rejection. Behind Loki's sharp eyes and mischievous smile was a growing void, an emptiness carved by the silent message that he would never be enough. The love and approval he craved seemed always just out of reach, replaced instead by subtle dismissals and the ever-present feeling of being less than. This is the painful reality of comparison. It silently erodes self-worth by making a person feel invisible or inferior. It's a slow, relentless process that reshapes how one sees the world, and oneself. But Loki's struggle was more than just envy or frustration. It was the beginning of a profound identity crisis. To be constantly measured against a standard one cannot meet creates a fracture in the self, a gap between who you are and who you are expected to be. The more he tried to belong, the more he felt pushed away. And as this internal conflict simmered beneath the surface, it twisted his view of reality, warping admiration into bitterness and curiosity into suspicion. What made Loki's situation unique, and tragic, was how invisible this crisis was to those around him. In a family and society so focused on strength and honor, no one recognized the quiet battle raging inside him. No one saw the weight of rejection that bent his spirit and shaped his decisions. His envy wasn't simply jealousy. It was a survival mechanism, a reaction to deep emotional pain that no one dared to acknowledge. And so, as the shadows lengthened around Loki's heart, a storm was quietly gathering, a storm fueled by loneliness, rejection, and the desperate desire to be seen. But what no one foresaw was how this storm would soon break, changing everything. The subtle roots of his pain were about to grow into something far more powerful, and far more dangerous. Something no one was prepared for. The quiet storm inside Loki finally found a trigger, an event that shattered whatever fragile sense of belonging he had left. It was not a grand confrontation or a thunderous clash, but a moment of subtle rejection that carried immense weight. When the family celebrated another of Thor's victories, praising the strength and honor he displayed, Loki's cleverness went unnoticed once again. This repeated dismissal was not just a slight, it was a confirmation of his deepest fear. That he would never truly be accepted. Psychologists describe this as a critical rupture, an emotional fracture where a person's internal world no longer aligns with the reality around them. For Loki, this rupture ignited a shift from quiet envy to a profound inner conflict. His mind, once a place of clever strategies and playful mischief, became a battleground of doubt and anger. The internal voice that sought approval twisted into one that questioned his own worth and purpose. Externally, Loki began to withdraw, masking his pain behind a veneer of sarcasm and cunning. His interactions with others grew guarded, his smiles tinged with bitterness. This behavior is common in those who feel rejected. They protect themselves by building walls, distancing from the very connections they crave. His brothers, absorbed in their own glory, failed to notice the change. To them, Loki was simply becoming difficult, a trickster whose jokes now cut deeper. At the same time, the psychological concept of identity crisis took hold. Caught between who he was and who he was expected to be, Loki's sense of self became unstable. This crisis is often marked by confusion, self-doubt, and conflicting desires, an inner tug-of-war that can reshape a person's path entirely. For Loki, the pressure to live up to his family's ideals clashed violently with his own emerging identity as an outsider. The science behind such transformation reveals how rejection can alter brain chemistry, heightening stress responses and reinforcing negative self-perceptions. These changes make it harder to trust others and more tempting to embrace defensive behaviors, even if they lead to further isolation. Loki's growing bitterness was not just a choice, it was a psychological reaction to a world that repeatedly told him he did not belong. And so, as this invisible fracture deepened, Loki's world began to crumble from within. The careful balance he maintained gave way to turmoil, and the path ahead became unclear. The question remained, could he find a way to heal, or was this the moment where everything started to unravel? The subtle fracture that began as quiet envy now evolved into a more structured darkness within Loki's mind. It was no longer just the feeling of being sidelined, it had become a lens through which he viewed the entire world. His thoughts grew sharper, colder, as if a shadow had settled permanently over his perception. The clever tricks and playful mischief became tools of control, ways to assert power in a reality that continually rejected him. Inside his mind, the chaos began to organize itself into a calculated pattern. Psychologists refer to this as cognitive restructuring, the process by which individuals reshape their beliefs to protect themselves from emotional pain. Loki started to see his brothers not just as rivals but as obstacles, embodiments of a system that denied him the recognition he deserved. His envy hardened into resentment, but it was no longer blind. It was precise, strategic. Loki's behavior began to reveal this new mindset. His words cut deeper, his jokes became sharper, and his schemes more intricate. Each act was a reflection of his internal struggle, a silent scream against the world that had cast him aside. He found solace not in acceptance but in control, manipulating events from the shadows, bending reality to his will. This was a psychological defense, a way to reclaim power where he had none. Scientific theories about the development of personality disorders provide insight into this transformation. When rejection and identity crises go unaddressed, they can lead to rigid thinking patterns and distorted self-image. Loki's evolving mindset fits this pattern. The more he felt trapped, the more he reshaped his beliefs to justify his actions and protect his fragile self-esteem. His mind became a fortress built on suspicion and cunning. But despite the power he wielded, there was still a part of Loki that remained vulnerable, a hidden fracture beneath the surface. The darkness that structured his thoughts was not invincible. It was fragile, born from pain and fear rather than true strength. Yet, to the outside world, this vulnerability was invisible. They saw only the trickster, the schemer, the enemy. And so, while Loki's mind sharpened into something dangerous and precise, the greatest threat was still dormant. Waiting beneath the surface, unseen even by him. The true shadow had not yet awakened, but when it did, it would change everything. There came a moment in Loki's journey when the fragile balance within him shattered completely. This was the point of no return, a psychological crossing where the lines between right and wrong blurred, and his worldview twisted into something unrecognizable. What had started as a desperate need for acceptance had transformed into a resolve to redefine the rules of the game itself. The rejection he once internalized now fueled a radical reshaping of his moral compass. At this stage, Loki no longer sought validation from others. Instead, he began to rationalize his actions as necessary, an assertion of his own identity in a world that denied him a place. The conflict that once caused him pain became a source of power. He saw himself as a disruptor, challenging a system built on favoritism and exclusion. This shift is not uncommon in cases of identity crises that go unresolved. When a person's fundamental sense of self is threatened, they may adopt extreme positions to protect themselves. Philosophically, this raises a profound question: if the system rejects you, are you wrong to reject the system in return? Loki's actions were no longer about personal vendettas, they were about confronting the very foundation of his world's values. His cunning and manipulation became instruments of change, blurring the line between villainy and resistance. The viewers are invited to ask themselves, could he be justified? Is his rebellion a form of justice, or a descent into self-destruction? Within Loki's mind, this shift was accompanied by a complex rationalization process. Cognitive dissonance theory explains how people reconcile conflicting beliefs and behaviors to reduce psychological discomfort. Loki crafted narratives that justified his actions, seeing himself as the misunderstood hero rather than the antagonist. This moral flexibility is a common trait in those navigating profound internal conflict. The tension escalated as Loki crossed this invisible threshold. No longer bound by the need for approval, he embraced his role as an agent of chaos and change. Yet, the question lingered: was this a victory of self-assertion or the beginning of a deeper unraveling? And as the story darkened, the audience is left with a haunting dilemma: what if Loki was right all along? Beneath the surface of Loki's apparent chaos and cunning lies a methodical, almost clinical logic that drives each of his actions. What outsiders see as reckless rebellion, impulsive mischief, or pure defiance is, in fact, the product of years of psychological adaptation and survival mechanisms carefully honed in response to persistent rejection and identity crisis. The science behind this transformation reveals that Loki's behavior is not a descent into irrational madness but a calculated response born of necessity, a cold, deliberate strategy to reclaim control over a world that continually marginalized him. Psychological research consistently shows that prolonged experiences of rejection or social exclusion have profound effects on human behavior and brain function. Individuals who are repeatedly sidelined often develop a heightened sensitivity to social cues and threats, triggering defensive strategies designed to regain influence or prevent further emotional harm. Loki's trademark cleverness, trickery, and manipulation are textbook examples of such adaptive responses. His mind operates like a chess player's, anticipating moves and counter-moves in a game where invisibility equals powerlessness. In this light, Loki's mischief becomes a form of agency. A way to assert presence in an environment that refuses to acknowledge his worth. Additionally, neuroscience provides insight into how chronic emotional stress rewires brain pathways, particularly those related to trust, fear, and self-preservation. Repeated experiences of neglect and invalidation can heighten activity in regions associated with threat detection, such as the amygdala, while dampening the brain's capacity for empathy and connection. This neurobiological shift explains why Loki's bitterness and distrust deepened over time, fueling a mindset that prioritizes self-defense and strategic calculation over genuine relationships. His mental fortress, though seemingly cold and harsh, is a fragile structure designed to protect a vulnerable core shaped by years of emotional wounds. When viewed through this scientific lens, Loki's evolving personality aligns with known patterns observed in individuals who navigate complex social environments marked by competition and exclusion. His transformation is neither random nor purely emotional, it is an intelligent response crafted through the interplay of environmental pressures and innate psychological drives. Moreover, comparisons to both historical and fictional figures who faced similar psychological struggles shed light on a universal theme: the thin line between hero and villain is often defined by perspective and circumstance. Many who are branded as outcasts, rebels, or troublemakers exhibit motivations deeply rooted in unmet emotional needs and a fierce drive for recognition and respect. Loki fits this archetype perfectly. An anti-hero shaped by rejection but motivated by a longing for identity and validation. This comprehensive analysis culminates in a shocking revelation: Loki's actions were never impulsive chaos for its own sake. Instead, they were part of a deliberate, coldly calculated plan to challenge and overturn a system that excluded and diminished him. His behavior was a form of intelligent resistance, a strategy born from pain but executed with precision. For the audience, this means a profound shift in understanding. What appeared as mindless chaos and villainy is, in reality, a manifestation of calculated defiance. Loki was never lost to irrational madness. He was a master strategist, playing a high-stakes game where the ultimate prize was his own sense of self and place in the world. As the shadows deepen, the question lingers. In a world that often rewards conformity and punishes difference, how many others silently wage similar wars within themselves? And if Loki's calculated resistance is a reflection of a deeper psychological truth, what does that say about our own judgments of those we label as villains? When the dust finally settles, what remains is far more than the aftermath of Loki's calculated rebellion. His legacy is a complex and enduring imprint on the world around him, one that challenges the very foundations of the society that shaped and rejected him. The chaos he unleashed was not merely an act of destruction, but a profound catalyst for change, forcing those who witnessed it to question their own values, biases, and the fragile systems of perfection they once believed untouchable. The world Loki defied could never revert to its previous state. It was forever transformed, cracked open by his defiance and the truths it revealed. To many, Loki remains a figure of controversy. Some see him as a villain, an agent of disorder who broke rules and created upheaval without remorse. Others view him as a tragic antihero, a being shaped by deep wounds of rejection, misunderstood and craving validation in a world that celebrated flawless harmony and rejected imperfection. This duality exposes a fundamental truth about human nature: the lines dividing hero from villain, order from chaos, right from wrong, are often far less clear than we wish to admit. These boundaries shift depending on who is looking and from which angle. From a psychological standpoint, Loki's journey offers a powerful case study on the lasting effects of identity crises and social exclusion. His story highlights how deeply formative these experiences can be, shaping not only behaviors but also worldviews, often in ways that the broader society fails to comprehend or accommodate. Loki's life compels us to confront uncomfortable questions about acceptance, empathy, and the true cost of rigid expectations and social hierarchies. What happens when individuals are pushed to the margins and denied a space to be their authentic selves? How often do these pressures give rise to resistance that is misinterpreted as mere defiance? On a more philosophical level, Loki's legacy provokes us to reflect on the nature of judgment, morality, and compassion. Who are we, as a society, to condemn those who fight desperately for recognition and belonging in an unyielding world? The scars he bears are not only his own but are also marks left by a culture struggling with its own imperfections and blind spots. In recognizing this, we are challenged to reconsider our perspectives. Perhaps Loki's greatest act was to expose the cracks beneath a seemingly perfect facade, revealing the vulnerabilities and injustices we often ignore. Yet, even as this chapter draws to a close, it hints at a haunting continuation. The final thought lingers, but perhaps, he was not the last. This ominous suggestion invites us to look beyond Loki's story alone and consider the countless others who silently endure similar struggles. How many more Lokis exist in the shadows, wrestling with rejection, identity confusion, and the overwhelming need to be seen and understood? How often does this silent turmoil simmer beneath the surface, waiting for its moment to break free and reshape the world? Ultimately, Loki's legacy transcends mere chaos or destruction. It is a profound and unsettling challenge to how we see ourselves, others, and the society we build. It calls us to empathy, to deeper reflection, and to a reconsideration of what it truly means to belong. In a world eager to classify people as heroes or villains, Loki's story reminds us that human experience is rarely so simple. Beneath every act of rebellion lies a complex narrative of pain, survival, and the universal quest for identity and acceptance.